Okay, in the Chapter 1, Section 1, the main objectives are to, first of all, define economics, and then to discuss some important economic concepts, such as, of all these mentioned here, opportunity cost is the most important concept discussed in this first section. Then there are these three fundamental economic questions, but they're actually not as important as the first two, defining economics and understanding what we mean by opportunity cost. Okay, so if you ask a dozen economists, what is the definition of economics, you probably will get a dozen slightly different answers. This is the definition that your book gives, and I think it's a good one. I have a small quibble with it that I'll tell you in a moment, but economics is a social science that examines how people choose among the alternatives available to them. It is social because it involves people and their behavior. It is a science because it uses, as much as possible, a scientific approach in its investigation of choices. If I had to write a definition, I would probably say something very similar, but it would be economics is a social science that examines how people make decisions in areas related to consumption, production, and related activities. So, for example, a related activity would be distribution of a good, right? But economics is concerned, could be defined by the topics that it looks at. It's not only the stock market, as some people believe. It's a wide variety of decisions and behaviors that generally have to do with consumption and production, sometimes related things like distribution and transportation. It's also defined by the methods that economists use. And we'll talk about methods in the next video. Of the concepts discussed in this section, the most important one is opportunity cost. So I trust that all of you know what scarcity means and what it means to make a choice. So I'm not going to talk about them, but we will talk about opportunity cost. And I'll give you some examples that will help you understand what opportunity cost is. So opportunity cost is the way that economists think about cost. Fortunately, this document camera sometimes requires a little balancing, but okay, there we go. So anyway, this is mainly so that you know what section of the book we're referring to. All right. I'm doing my best here, folks. All right, well, okay. Eventually, when you're watching this at home, you'll have the book. So let me give you an example of how an accountant and an economist think about cost differently. If you ask, let's say there's a business. It consists of a piece of land and a factory and some machines inside the factory. And you ask the accountant, what did that land cost? He will say, well, back in 1970, we bought this 5-acre site in Santa Clara for $5 million. Maybe he'll make some adjustments for price level changes, but it will be oftentimes at the cost that they paid initially. But opportunity cost, as we see here, is the value of the best alternative foregone in making any choice. Another definition of opportunity cost, and you should write this down because you're already here with a desk in front of you and a paper and a pen in front of you. So the additional work to write down notes is trivial, right? You might think that this is obvious and you'll remember it later, but chances are when you get home you will say, what was the definition of opportunity cost? And what were those examples that the professor gave us that were so obvious but now I can't remember them? So leave yourself little clues so that you'll help yourself remember. So another definition for opportunity cost is what you're giving up, what you have to give up to get something. So now go back to our little factory example. To have this factory on this land, you give up the opportunity of selling that land. And now that it's 2014, And Santa Clara has changed quite dramatically over the last 44 years. Do you think that that land is still worth maybe what they paid for it in 1970? No, probably not, right? Real estate prices in the entire Bay Area are a lot higher now than they were back then. So let's say you can sell that land for $20 million. Then the cost of that land is not what you paid for it, like an accountant might claim, but what you give up from keeping it, namely the chance to sell it. Let me give you another example. To attend San Jose State University, you have to pay tuition and then several fees, right? Student health fee and other fees. But actually the biggest cost of going to college is one that you don't actually put any money down on the table for, and that is the opportunity cost. So what's the opportunity cost of going to college? Yeah? The opportunity to take up a job, right? In fact, there are many things that you could do. So let's say you're a famous basketball player, and you could go to the NBA and make millions. And then you're considering going to college. Like, well, it's $10,000 a year tuition. Should I go to college or not? That's not the right decision, right? That's not the economically correct decision. The economically correct decision is, I go to college, pay $10,000, and give up the opportunity to make $20 million, right? So that's the real cost. And economists always think about cost in terms of opportunity cost. Now, let me draw your attention to one nuanced aspect of this definition: the value of the best alternative foregone. So oftentimes when you're making a decision, there are many options, right? Like if you don't go to college, you could get a job and work, you could go on vacation, travel around Europe or some other region, right? There are other things that you could be doing. And so what do we say is the opportunity cost of it? Just the one that is the most valuable. So if it depends on the individual, right? For some people it could be the time that they could be making money or something else. So, but generally, the simple way to think about opportunity cost is just what you give up. All right, so now here we have our first case in point. And these case in point articles are important for you because you're going to be writing 3 original case in point articles yourself. This first one talks about oil, which is an exhaustible resource. I think that this case in point article is a pretty good one. It's appropriate, at least, because first of all it deals with an economic problem, producing oil, right? Extracting oil. And then it also talks about, it illustrates the opportunity cost of extracting oil. So if you are a company that's extracting oil, you may be concerned that, as they say here on page 11, the process of sorry, you can't see that here. The process of extracting heavy crude costs a company $25 a barrel compared to $6 per barrel of extracting and refining light crude. So that would be the type of cost that an accountant might consider. And so this whole case in point article is about extracting oil from sands. And there's a lot of oil in the sands of places like Alberta, Canada. But extracting it is not cheap, as we already saw. It also has other costs. For example, one thing we give up in order to extract this oil, as they say here, so not everyone agrees that extracting this oil in Canada is a good idea. George Poitras, a member of the Minkisi Cree tribe, lives downstream from the oil sands development. You see a lot of the land dug up, a lot of the boreal forest struck down, and it's upsetting. This Diana Gibson of an environmental advocacy group says that there's a lot of environmental damage generated by the extraction of oil sands, and it involves the loss of very valuable ecosystems and permanent pollution. So this case in point article, not only deals with an interesting controversy and illustrates the type of opportunity costs involved in production decisions. But it's also a timely example. So these are the types of things that you might be looking for in your original case in point articles. Okay, so for now I'll end this video lecture of section 1 of chapter 1, and we'll move on to the next section in the next video.